Welcome. I would like to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver Braithwaite campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge that you're joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. Have you ever felt like you got off track during an interview answer? Sharing your stories from previous experiences in an interview is a skill that takes practice. Let's learn about the STARR Method, which is a strategy you can use when employers ask you, "Tell me about a time when." During an interview, this question might sound like, "Tell me about a time when you experienced conflict while working in a team." Or it might also sound like, "Tell me about a time when you developed a creative solution to a problem." Employers also call this a behavior-based interview question. So why might an interviewer ask you this type of question? When an interviewer asks you to tell them about your previous experiences, what they're really asking you to do is reflect on your past choices and actions in a professional setting. Many employers craft interview questions to determine how well you perform in the responsibilities of the role. This type of interview question helps you to provide evidence from your past experiences that indicates how well you perform in the new setting. You will notice I say professional setting, which I think is broader than formal paid work experience. It is common to answer an interview question by using an example from a range of experiences. You can answer your interview question by using examples from academic experiences, perhaps a class or research project. You can also answer interview questions by using experiences from your leadership, volunteer, or extracurricular experiences. Of course, if you have had jobs before, you can use examples from your previous work experiences as well. Whichever type of experience you choose, you're trying to demonstrate your professional experience, skills, and your competences in a way that is aligned with the job you're interviewing for. Pro tip: what's really important when you're telling your story in response to an interview question is being able to present it in a way that is clear, concise, and is easy for an employer to follow, and at the same time, easy for you to deliver effectively while feeling confident. The STARR Method is a really great way to help you do just that. STARR is an acronym, which means that each letter stands for a word. It is a strategy to help you remember the right level of detail and emphasis while keeping your story organized. STAR stands for situation, task, action, result, and the final R is like a bonus point on an exam. It stands for relevance. What does this look like in practice? Using one of those examples I earlier mentioned, that is, tell me about a time when you creatively solved a problem, might remind you about a time when you worked on a project with your engineering design team. How are you going to organize that story so that you can convey it effectively? I'm going to walk through each piece of the STARR Method, and I'll do a complete example at the end so that we can see how they all fit together. The first step of using the STARR Method is articulating the situation in which the story took place. This means providing a bit of context so that someone understands the where and the when. Did your story take place while you were working at a previous job? Was it a volunteer or a leadership role? What is the framing detail that someone would need in order to understand where that story is taking place? You don't need to provide a lot of information here. Usually, a few words or maybe a sentence will help to clarify this. Task is where you identify the problem, situation, or challenge. What is it where you're trying to actually do or change? What was the goal you were trying to achieve? If you think about the way we tell stories, usually what drives a narrative is some aspect of conflict. So what will be the conflict that is going to create momentum in an interview answer that you're providing? Situation and task are both going to be actually brief. This isn't where you want to spend the bulk of your time. You want to be able to just move through it fairly quickly. When you get to the action, that's where you want to slow down the pace and become much more detailed. You want to explain carefully and step by step all the actions you took in response to the task or challenge you're faced with. This is also a really great time to explain the why, or Reflect on the motivation behind them. So when you took those actions, why did you take them in the particular way you chose to? You may not actually have known the motivation when you're carrying out those actions, but this gives you the opportunity to reflect and fill in that info so that the future employer really gets the chance to understand how your mind works and how you make decisions as a professional. The result is where you highlight the outcome. Not all results have to be positive. The result of the example you're providing might be that you made a decision and you learned something, and you will not be proceeding in the same way in a future context. If there was a positive outcome, that's great, and it's great to be specific about that outcome. In general, you want to provide a strong conclusion to your story so that the person who is listening knows you have reached the end point and they have the satisfaction of having seen the task being resolved in some way. The final point, relevance, is optional. It gives you the chance to connect the story you have told to the job you're applying to. If, for example, you have told a story about your customer service experience and you're now looking to move into a job where you'll be dealing with clients, some of the skills you have learned on how to work effectively with customers and keep them happy are going to translate into the relationships you hope to build with your clients. That will be an example of using relevance to connect all the pieces. So let's try an example together. And as I speak, see if you can identify the different parts of the story. A potential interview question might be something like, tell me about a time when you had to manage a stressful change. As you saw at the beginning, you're being asked to reflect on a past experience and narrate a story about how you responded to that task or responded to that challenge. I'm going to give a potential answer now. See if you can identify the components of the STARR method being used here. In spring of 2020, I was involved in a research project as part of my master's that involved human participants. I was initially supposed to meet with these participants in person in order to be able to collect the data. Due to the outbreak of COVID-19, I wasn't going to be able to meet with those participants. It wasn't safe and it wasn't in line with the current health guidelines for me to actually meet with them in person. This represented a really stressful change for me because I had spent months drafting the plans and the research protocols in order to be able to align with that. And now I had to come up with some other system. So while I felt a lot of stress about this experience, I also knew I had to act quickly. So I reached out to a former mentor of mine, a faculty member who had taught me some classes in undergrad, and I asked for their perspective on what they might suggest. They suggested a number of different options, and one of the ones that resonated with me was the possibility of moving to online video interviews. I hadn't thought that would be possible because of concerns around confidentiality, but they mentioned a new software that was encrypted and would allow those interviews to meet the standards of security. I did some independent research to double check that the software tool would be available and that it would meet UBC's encryption standards. I also drew up a budget in which I reallocated the budget I would have spent towards travel to meet with my participants in person towards paying for the cost of the software to conduct the interviews digitally. Once I had reallocated the budget and I had a feasible proposal, I took that proposal to my current supervisor and suggested that we move from in-person interviews to doing our interviews digitally. My current supervisor was on board with this plan, and so we were able to reach out to our participants and obtain their consent. And in 90% of cases, they consented to go through with the protocol digitally. I am currently at about a midway point of conducting those interviews. There's definitely been some challenges associated with it, as I had to learn a new technology on the fly. But I also feel there's something different and rich that we have gained. We have actually been able to do longer conversations through the digital space, and people have been more willing to open up around some different questions. At this point, I'm really confident that the results of this project are still going to be publishable, and in fact, there might be something different, and the findings that we have arrived at may not have arrived at if we had followed the conventional protocols. So what did you notice? I didn't go into the relevance there, but as you can see, there was a brief mention of the scenario, that is, what was the project, We describe the problem or the task, that is, this individual was challenged with being unable to conduct their interviews in person, and a description of the different steps they took. You might have thought that it wasn't very important to include the detail about the conversation with the mentor. But what I think that might reveal is that this person's first instinct, when they're faced with a challenging situation, was to reach out to someone who was helpful and knowledgeable. That actually sheds light on how they might perform as a professional in another context, and employers are looking to understand what your approach is to your work through the interview. It also helps them judge the quality of your work and if it aligns with their organizational culture. The jobs you're currently applying for can range widely, and the stories you might choose to display using the STARR method will be different. As you start to anticipate interview questions and plan your potential answers, the STARR method can be a tool for you to use that gives your stories a clear structure. This approach ensures you're describing the specific actions you took, highlighting your contributions and results, and effectively communicating your personal story. For a final activity, tell us what you have learned today. Enter the URL or scan the code to share what has changed for you as a result of this video. Learn more about other job search skills or find events to meet UBC alumni and employers at students.ubc.ca/career. Click on Career Resources or Career Events and Workshops. Up next, check out the video on the hidden job market, how to craft your strategies. Thanks for watching.